Hello all, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we will learn how to install UiPath Orchestrator new version, which was released in 2021 in the month of October. Mainly this video is divided into 4 sections, that is hardware requirements. What are the hardware requirements that is needed to install the UiPath Orchestrator? The second thing is that software requirements. The third one is prerequisite for installation, and the last one is installation process. We will cover the complete installation in these 4 sections. If you are new to my YouTube channel, then please do not forget to subscribe my channel and also like this video. Let us continue with the first section, that is hardware requirements. Say for example, if you are planning to deploy the development environment, then these are the hardware requirements for the development environment. Web application server where UiPath Orchestrator will be installed. So the configuration for this web application server would be a CPU core that should be greater than 2 GHz. So CPU core should be a 4 minimum. Then random access memory that should be a 4 GB and hard disk should be a 150 GB. This is the recommended configuration for the application server where UiPath Orchestrator will be installed. Then second server is SQL server. So for SQL server as well, it is recommended CPU core would be a 4 and it should be greater than 2 GHz. Then RAM should be a 4 GB and hard disk should be a 300 GB. Here this requirement assumes a maximum of 100 attended robots running simultaneously. Based on this requirement, that is 100 unattended robots will be running simultaneously, this configuration has been identified, and configuration will be varied based upon your deployment or your requirement. So this is about the simple development environment. Let us move ahead with the production environment. For production environment, it is highly recommended to provide one dedicated server for each role. For example, Orchestrator web application should be deployed on a separate server. SQL Server database engine should be deployed on another server, and Elasticsearch and Kibana that will be deployed on third server. So for production environment, every component should have a different server. Orchestrator would be on one server, SQL Server would be on second server, and Elasticsearch and Kibana would be on third server. For a multi-node installation, in addition to the above servers, high availability add-ons for Orchestrator is needed. That is 3 plus HAA nodes are required for high availability and 6 plus HAA nodes for geo redundancy. So this is recommended configurations for the production environment. Again, based on your requirement, there would be a changes needed in a configuration. The third scenario is that, say for example, support up to 250 unattended robots. Let us consider the web application server configuration for this scenario. Say for example, if there are less than 20 robots, then 4 CPU cores are recommended, and which should have minimum 2 GHz. Then RAM would be a 4 GB and 100 GB hard disk is recommended. If the count of robot is less than 50, then again the server configuration remains same, 4 CPU cores, 4 GB RAM and 100 GB hard disk. If the robot count is less than 100, then 4 CPU cores, 4 GB RAM and 150 GB hard disk. If robot count is less than 200, then 4 CPU cores, 4 GB RAM and 200 GB hard disk. If robot count is less than 250, then 4 CPU cores, 4 GB RAM and 200 GB hard disk. So this is the configuration for web application server for up to 250 unattended robots. Let us move ahead to see the configuration for SQL server. If less than 20 robots are running, then CPU core should be 4 with minimum 2 GHz. Then RAM should be 8 GB and hard disk should be 100 GB. If robot count is less than 50, then CPU core should be 4, 8 GB RAM and 200 GB hard disk. If robot count is less than 100, then 4 CPU cores, 8 GB RAM and 300 GB hard disk. If robot count is less than 200, then 8 CPU cores, 8 GB RAM and 400 GB SDD is recommended. And if robot count is less than 250, then 8 CPU cores, 16 GB RAM and 400 GB SDD. So this is a recommended configuration for SQL Server when support up to 250 unattended robots. Let us move ahead with Elasticsearch Server configuration. If less than 20 robots are running, then it is recommended 4 CPU cores, 4 GB RAM and 100 GB hard disk. If robot count is less than 50, then 4 CPU cores, 4 GB RAM and 100 GB SDD, that is hard disk. If robot count is less than 100, then CPU core 4, 8 GB RAM and 150 GB hard disk. If robot count is less than 200, then 4 CPU cores, 12 GB RAM and 200 GB hard disk. If robot count is less than 250, then 4 CPU cores, 12 GB RAM and 300 GB hard disk. This is the recommended configuration for Elasticsearch Server when support up to 250 unattended robots is needed. Let us move ahead with the another scenario, support between 250 to 500 unattended robots. Let us check the configuration for web application server. Robot count is less than, there are robots, count is less than 300, then 8 CPU cores is recommended and each CPU core should be minimum 2 GHz. Then 8 GB RAM and 200 GB hard disk is recommended. If robot count is less than 400, then 8 CPU cores, 8 GB RAM and 220 GB hard disk is recommended. If robot count is less than 500, then 16 CPU cores, 16 GB RAM and 250 GB hard disk is recommended. So this is the web application server configuration where orchestrator will be installed for support between 250 to 500 unattended robots. Let us move ahead and check the configuration for SQL Server. If less than 300 robots are running, then 16 CPU cores, 32 GB RAM and 400 GB SDD is recommended. If robot count is less than 400, then 16 CPU cores, 32 GB RAM and 500 GB SDD is recommended. If less than 500 robots are there, then 16 CPU cores, 32 GB RAM and 600 GB SDD is recommended. And for Elasticsearch Server, if less than 300 robots are running, then 4 CPU cores, 12 GB RAM and 300 GB hard disk is recommended. If less than 400 robots are running, then 4 CPU cores, 16 GB RAM and 500 GB hard disk is recommended. If robot count is less than 500, then 4 CPU cores, 16 GB RAM and 600 GB hard disk is recommended. Let us start with the new deployment scenario. This is about the large deployments. Whenever we use infrastructure as a service for attended deployments, the following services are required. You may use the infrastructure as a service from any cloud. It could be Azure services or Amazon services, or maybe it could be Google services as well. So it depends on your choice which cloud platform that you are using. The following services are required: Windows Server Virtual Machine for Orchestrator, Windows Server Virtual Machine for SQL Server, Virtual Machine Availability Set for Elasticsearch, Azure Load Balancer, High Availability Add-ons, and Distributed DNS service such as Cloudflare. So these are the services that would be required when we use infrastructure as a service from the cloud platform. Let us check the orchestrator node configuration. If we are using the multi-node installation for the orchestrator, then each orchestrator node should be configured as follows. So 16 virtual CPUs, 32 GB RAM and 128 GB hard disk would be needed for each orchestrator node. Let us check SQL Server configuration. The SQL Server virtual machine specification must be scaled in line with the number of orchestrator nodes. Say for example, if we have deployed 1 to 2 orchestrator nodes, then 8 virtual CPUs, 16 GB RAM and 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for database, temp DB and transaction log would be needed. Then the second scenario is that if 5 orchestrator nodes has been deployed, then 16 virtual CPUs, 32 GB RAM and 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for database, 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for temp DB and 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for transaction log would be needed. If orchestrator nodes are 10, then 32 virtual CPUs, 64 GB RAM and 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for database, 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for temp DB and 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for transaction log would be needed. If orchestrator nodes are 15, then 40 virtual CPUs, 96 GB RAM and 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for database, 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for temp DB and 1 TB Ultra SSD disk for transaction log would be needed. For Elasticsearch availability set, 8 virtual CPUs, 16 GB RAM and 128 SSD with 5000 IOPS and 100 MB per second throughput is needed. And about one disk with 5000 IOPS and 200 MB per second throughput is needed. Okay. The another scenario is, or another deployment is that platform as a service for attended deployments. The following prerequisites are needed. For orchestrator app service plan, 20 P3 V2 instances. Then Azure SQL Server Premium P15 4000 DTUs. Azure Redis Cache P2 Premium 13 GB. For Identity Server App Service Plan, 2 instances P3 V2. Then Azure SQL Server Standard S7 8000 DTU. And for Elasticsearch Virtual Machine Availability Set. These are the different services that would be needed for platform as a service deployment. Then let us understand what are the TCP ports that would be used during this deployment. The first one is 443. This is default port for communication between users and orchestrator with the connected robots. Then the second one is 1433. This is default port for communication between orchestrator and the SQL Server machine. Then 9200. This is the default port for communication between orchestrator and Elasticsearch. Then 9300 is used communication between Elasticsearch nodes if applicable. The next one is 5601. This is default port used by the Kibana plugin if applicable. And the last one is 3389. This is required for RDP automation needed for high density robots. So these are the hardware configuration requirement to deploy the UiPath Orchestrator. I hope I have explained the hardware requirements more in detail. In case you have any question or any query, then please comment in a comment section and I will respond to you at the earliest. Okay, I hope you understood the hardware configuration details. If you are new to my channel, then please do not forget to subscribe my channel and also share this video.